The Krethos 7 outpost squatted on the surface of a moon that had all the aesthetic charm of a burned potato someone had left in the oven for 3 weeks too long. Grey dust, greyer rocks, and the occasional patch of surprisingly resilient lichen that somehow managed to look depressed despite being a non-sentient organism. The outpost itself was a collection of prefabricated modules that had been designed by someone who clearly believed that morale was a myth and comfort was for the weak. Inside Module 7, Commander Thexniller of the Vrex Sovereignty stood before the assembled personnel with the kind of expression that suggested he'd rather be doing literally anything else. His chitinous faceplates shifted in what his species considered a gesture of solemn responsibility, though to most other species it looked like he was trying to suppress gas. "The supply freighter has been delayed," Thexniller announced, his translator rendering his clicks and whistles into flat, bureaucratic galactic common. Delayed, as it happens, by a rather unfortunate encounter with a debris field in the Kessler corridor. The cargo is scattered across approximately 4 cubic light-hours of space. Retrieval operations are underway. Lieutenant Quinvara, a Quilnari whose species looked like someone had crossbred a praying mantis with a very judgmental librarian, raised one of her 4 arms. "Commander, when you say delayed you mean—" "I mean," the Xniller interrupted, "that our current rations are depleted as of 0600 hours this morning. Water reserves will last another 72 hours with strict rationing. After that, we survive on emergency protocols and the sincere hope that the universe has a sense of humor." The room erupted in the multi-species equivalent of panic. The 2 Helkari engineers began their traditional death chant, which sounded like someone had stuck a synthesizer in a washing machine. The Bronthy logistics officer immediately pulled out his datapad and began calculating survival times with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for hobbies. The 3 Vorqual troopers simply sat down on the floor and began meditating, because when you're a species that evolved on a planet where predators could smell fear from 6 kilometers away, you learn to accept death with dignity. In the back corner, Corporal Marcus Chen, the only human on the base, and arguably the only member of any species present who didn't seem particularly bothered, tilted his chair back against the wall and scratched his jaw thoughtfully. He'd been growing a beard for the past 2 weeks, mostly because the base's sonic showers didn't really work properly, and regular shaving seemed like wasted effort. "Questions?" the Xniller asked, in the tone of someone who really hoped there wouldn't be any. There were 17 questions, ranging from, "Can we eat the lichen?" which was answered with a firm "only if you enjoy total organ failure," to, "Has anyone sent a distress beacon?" which was answered with, "Of course we have. We're not idiots. It's just that the nearest ship is 8 days away." Marcus said nothing. He just watched, chair still tilted back, expression unreadable. When the briefing ended and the personnel scattered to their modules to contemplate mortality in whatever way their species preferred, Marcus stood up, stretched, and walked out. Nobody noticed. They were too busy panicking. The commanding officers convened in Module 3, which served as both headquarters and the place where important people made important decisions that would be criticized by historians later. Commander Thexniller sat across from Lieutenant Quinvara, and between them was a holographic display showing their current resource situation, which could be summarized as bad with a footnote of getting worse. "We implement Protocol Omega-7, Quinvara said, her mandibles clicking in a way that suggested she was reading from a manual, even though she wasn't. "Strict water rationing. 200 milliliters per person per day. We shut down all non-essential systems. We maintain life support and communications only. We prepare the personnel for the possibility of casualty situations. The Bronthy won't last 4 days on 200 milliliters. Thessanilla observed. Their biology requires more hydration. Then the Bronthe will die with dignity, Quinvara replied, because she was exactly the kind of officer who believed that following protocol was more important than minor details, like keeping everyone alive. It's in the manual. Chapter 47, subsection 12. Crisis management in resource-depleted environments. Did we invite the human to this meeting? Thessanilla asked suddenly. Quinvara's mandibles stopped clicking. The human? Why would we invite the human? They've been in the galactic military for less than a standard year. Their species barely understands formation marching. What could they possibly contribute to command-level strategic discussion? Fair point. Thessanilla agreed. I suppose Deathworld species have their own ways of processing existential dread. Probably off somewhere doing those strange physical exercises they insist on. Push-ups, I think they're called. Peculiar species. They spent the next 2 hours drafting a very official and very depressing schedule for the slow decline into dehydration, complete with timestamps and a section for final messages to loved ones, which was considerate if deeply fatalistic. Nobody thought to check what Marcus was actually doing. By hour 3 of the crisis, people started noticing that the human was missing. Private Keltor, a young Vrex who'd been assigned to the same barracks module as Marcus, mentioned it to his bunkmate. Have you seen Chen? The human? No. Probably in his bunk, staring at the ceiling. That's what Deathworlders do, isn't it? They contemplate violence and survival until they achieve some kind of emotional equilibrium. I checked his bunk. He's not there. Meditation chamber. We don't have a meditation chamber. Then I don't know. Maybe he's already dead. I heard humans can die if they go 6 hours without consuming something called coffee. Tragic, really. By hour 6, Marcus's absence had been noted by approximately half the base personnel, but nobody was particularly concerned. After all, they were all going to die anyway. If the human wanted to spend his final days alone, that was his business. Some species grief danced. Some species sang requiems. Maybe humans just wandered off. Who could say? It was hour 7 when Junior Officer Plixnor, a Quilnari who was extremely junior and therefore got all the jobs nobody else wanted, was assigned to do a head count for the official death roster they were preparing. Very organized, these military types. When you're going to die, at least die with proper paperwork. Plixnor checked every module. Barracks, empty. Recreation room, empty. Storage bay, empty. Finally, because he was thorough if nothing else, Plixnor checked the external monitors. There, approximately 200 meters from the base perimeter, was Marcus Chen, crouched next to something that looked like a bizarre sculpture made from base equipment, wire, and what appeared to be parts from a disassembled cargo loader. Plixnor stared at the screen. Then he tapped his communicator. Commander, you need to see this. 5 minutes later, half the command staff was crowded around the monitor, watching Marcus work on what could only be described as a primitive trap. He'd constructed 4 of them, spread out in a rough circle around a patch of ground where the lichen grew thicker. What? The Sixneller said slowly, is the human doing? I believe, Quinvara said, mandibles twitching with confusion. He's attempting to catch something. Catch what? There's nothing on this moon except lichen and those skitter-lizards, and those are completely uncatchable. They're classified as level 4 evasion fauna. Our xenobiologists spent 2 months trying to study them and caught exactly 0 specimens. On screen, Marcus finished adjusting one of the traps, stood up, brushed dust off his uniform pants, which were now decidedly non-regulation, and walked back toward the base with the casual stride of someone who hadn't just been told he was going to die of dehydration. "Should we," Plixnor ventured, "send someone to talk to him?" "About what?" Quinvara asked. "Violating the perimeter protocols. I think we have larger concerns right now than security regulations." "Maybe he's lost his mind," suggested Thixnilla. Deathworld species under stress can experience psychological breaks. It's documented. They decided to send Plixnor to talk to him because Plixnor was junior and expendable, and if the human had indeed gone insane and decided to do whatever it is insane humans do, better to lose a junior officer than someone important. Marcus returned 3 hours later, and he wasn't alone. He was dragging something on a makeshift sled he'd constructed from a storage panel and some elastic cord. 3 somethings, actually. 3 skitter-lizards, each about the size of a large dog, with iridescent scales and very sharp teeth. Very dead skitter-lizards with very sharp teeth. The base entrance airlock cycled, and Marcus hauled his cargo inside, leaving a small trail of definitely not regulation fluids across the floor. Plixnor, who'd been waiting by the airlock because he was terrified of disappointing his superiors more than he was terrified of potentially insane humans, stared. "You caught them," Plixnor said, his translator struggling to convey his utter bafflement. "Yep," Marcus replied, dropping the sled and rolling his shoulders. "Took longer than I thought. These guys are fast, but they're also curious and food-motivated. So," he shrugged, "traps work if you know what you're doing. But the xenobiologists couldn't catch them for 2 months. Yeah, well, xenobiologists probably weren't using bait and trigger mechanisms. They were probably using nets or something. Nets don't work on fast prey. You need traps. Basic hunting." "Hunting," Plixnor repeated, testing out the word like it was a foreign concept, which for him it absolutely was. "I think he is," whispered back the other Helkari engineer. "That's the thermoregulator from Storage Bay 3. That's technically stealing. We're all dying anyway." "Fair point." Marcus worked with the efficient confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, which he probably had, given that humans apparently spent a large portion of their evolution hitting things with sticks and then eating those things. He cleaned the skitter-lizards with quick, practiced movements, set aside the organs that looked questionable, and began cutting the meat into chunks. From his pack, which everyone was now realizing was much more full of equipment than regulation allowed, he produced a battered metal pot, several sealed containers of what he called seasoning, and a water filtration straw. "Where?" the Xnilla asked slowly. "Did you get water?" "Found an underground seep about half a click north," Marcus replied, dumping chunks of meat into the pot. "Your initial geological survey missed it. It's only about 2 meters down, but it's clean and it's flowing. I rigged a basic filter system. We're not going to die of thirst, Commander. We just needed to look harder." The silence that followed this announcement was the kind of silence that happens when an entire group of people realizes they've been planning their funerals prematurely. "You found water," Quinvara said flatly. "Yep. When?" "About 4 hours ago. Right after I set the traps." "And you didn't report this?" Marcus looked up from his pot, where he was now adding things from his seasoning containers that smelled absolutely incredible to at least half the species present, and absolutely horrifying to the other half. "I was busy hunting and setting up a filtration system. I was going to mention it after dinner. You know, when everyone wasn't busy calculating their death schedules." The stew, because that's what it was turning into, began to bubble. Marcus added some kind of dried vegetation he'd apparently collected from somewhere, a pinch of what looked like salt, and something else from an unlabeled container that made the air smell like the concept of comfort food had achieved physical form. The aliens watched in fascinated horror as Marcus stirred, tasted, adjusted, and stirred again. Cooking, they were realizing, was less like chemical processing and more like art practiced by someone who viewed dinner as a problem to be solved through the application of heat and seasoning. 30 minutes later, Marcus stood up, grabbed a ladle from his pack, which of course he had, and announced, "Dinner's ready. Form a line, bring your mess kits, and don't push. There's enough for everyone." The ex-Neller drew himself up to his full height, which was impressive for a Vrex. "Corporal, this is highly irregular. We cannot simply abandon protocol and consume unverified local fauna prepared in unsanitary conditions using stolen equipment." Marcus ladled himself a bowl, blew on it, took a bite, and made the kind of satisfied noise that transcended species. "Commander, you can starve with dignity if you want, but I'm eating. Anyone else hungry?" The junior personnel moved first. Plixnor, who figured he'd already committed himself to this insanity, grabbed his mess kit and got in line. The two Helkari engineers followed, their traditional death chant forgotten. One of the Vorqual troopers broke meditation, stood up and joined the line with the kind of deliberate movement that suggested he was making a choice between survival and protocol, and choosing survival. One by one, they came. Marcus served each of them with the same casual efficiency he'd shown in everything else, explaining that the meat was tender, the broth was nutritious, and yes, there was enough for seconds. The ex-Neller and Quinvara were the last to approach. They stood at the back of the line, watching their personnel eat with expressions ranging from joy to surprise to the kind of relief that comes from realizing you're not going to die after all. When they reached the front, Marcus served them without comment. No smugness, no lecture, just food. The ex-Neller took a bite. His faceplates shifted in what might have been surprise. "This is excellent." "Thanks," Marcus said. "My grandmother's recipe, well, sort of. She never cooked skitter-lizard, but the principle's the same." Quinvara ate in silence, her mandibles working thoughtfully. Finally, she said, "You violated 17 protocols today, Corporal." 18, actually," Marcus corrected. "I also bypassed the equipment checkout system for the fusion cell, and you found water, established sustainable food sources, and fed the entire base." "Yeah. I don't know whether to court-martial you or promote you." Marcus grinned. "How about you just let me teach everyone how to set traps? Because those skitter-lizards are going to figure out my current setup in a few days, and I'll need to rotate locations. Could use the help." Over the next hour, as the sun set over Krethos 7's depressing landscape, the outpost transformed. The Bronthe logistics officer, having calculated that they now had indefinite food and water, began crying, which for his species sounded like a broken air conditioning unit. The Helkari engineers asked Marcus to teach them about traps and cooking, taking notes with the fervor of students who'd just discovered their new favorite subject. The Vorqual troopers requested lessons in what Marcus called fieldcraft, which was apparently the art of not dying when the universe was trying its best to kill you. Even Thexnilla and Quinvara, after finishing their second bowls, had to admit that sometimes protocol was less important than results, and sometimes the newest member of the crew was the one who knew what to do, because they came from a planet where knowing what to do was the difference between eating and being eaten. Marcus set up a rotation schedule for trap maintenance. He showed 3 volunteers how to filter water from the underground seep. He explained which local plants were edible and which would cause intestinal distress that would make you wish you'd died of dehydration. He did all of this with the same casual competence, as if feeding 30 people on a moon that was supposed to be a death sentence was just another Tuesday. Question Plixnor asked during the impromptu survival skills seminar that had broken out by the fire. Why didn't you seem worried when the commander announced we were out of rations? Marcus poked at the fire, sending sparks up into the atmospheric shield. Because I'm from Earth. We've got deserts, tundras, jungles, oceans and mountains. We've got places where water falls from the sky and places where you'll die of thirst standing next to ice. Humans got good at not dying because our planet tried really hard to kill us for about 200,000 years. You learn things, such as there's almost always food, if you know where to look. There's almost always water, if you dig deep enough. And if you're going to die, you might as well die with a full stomach, because suffering on an empty stomach is just inefficient. The next day, Marcus led foraging teams. He taught the basics of trap construction to anyone interested, which turned out to be nearly everyone. He helped rig a better water filtration system using proper base equipment, now that command had given up on caring about protocol violations. The Outpost, which had been preparing for a slow decline into death, was now preparing for sustainability. When the supply ship finally arrived 8 days later, the crew found something unexpected. They found an outpost that was thriving. They found food stores that included dried skitter-lizard meat, preserved local vegetables, and a filtration system that produced more water than the base needed. They found a garden plot where someone was attempting to grow earth vegetables in alien soil with mixed but enthusiastic results. They found personnel who'd gained practical survival skills and looked healthier than when the supply lines had been working. The supply ship captain, a grizzled Corventhi who'd seen just about everything in 40 years of military logistics, walked through the outpost with increasing bewilderment. "Your report," he said to Commander Thexniller, "indicated you were in a crisis situation. This doesn't look like a crisis. This looks like a sustainable colony." "Yes," Thexniller agreed. "That would be because of Corporal Chen. One soldier did this. One human," Quinvara corrected. "Apparently when you tell a human that death is inevitable, they interpret it as a suggestion rather than a fact. The corporal refused to die, established food and water sources, and then taught everyone else how to also refuse to die. It's been educational." The captain found Marcus in the courtyard, teaching a class of 6 aliens how to properly clean and cook skitter-lizard. Marcus had somehow acquired a proper cooking station, several knives, and what appeared to be a handwritten cookbook. Corporal Chen. Marcus looked up, knife in hand, currently demonstrating the proper angle for removing bones. "That's me. I'm here to resupply your base." "Cool. We're good on food and water, but we could use coffee, spices, and maybe some actual cooking equipment. This makeshift stuff works, but it's not ideal." The captain stared at him. "You're good on food and water, on Krithos 7, the moon where nothing grows and water doesn't exist." "Water definitely exists, you just have to dig for it. And stuff grows, you just have to know what's edible." Marcus gestured at his students. "Plus, these guys are fast learners. Give it another month, and they won't need me at all. The reports I'm going to file about this," the captain said slowly, "are going to be rejected as fiction." "Probably," Marcus agreed cheerfully. "But hey, nobody died. Everyone ate, and I invented skitter-lizard stew. I'm calling it a win." The galaxy, it should be noted, was a vast and complicated place. It contained thousands of species, millions of worlds, and billions of individuals, each with their own evolutionary paths, their own survival strategies, and their own ways of facing crisis. The Quilnari had procedure, the Helkari had acceptance, the Bronthi had mathematics. Humans, apparently, had spite. Not the petty kind of spite, but the cosmic kind. The kind of spite that looked at the universe declaring you were going to die and responded with "not today" and a cooking pot. The kind of spite that saw inevitability and treated it like a challenge. The kind of spite that refused to go hungry when food existed somewhere, even if that somewhere was currently alive and running very fast. The official report, filed by Commander Thexniller, became required reading at the Galactic Military Academy, not as a manual on crisis management, but as a case study in what happens when you put a Death World species in a survival situation. The conclusion was simple: they survive, and then they help everyone else survive, and then they teach survival classes, and then they write cookbooks. 3 months after the ration crisis, the Krethos 7 outpost was redesignated as a training facility for wilderness survival. Marcus was promoted to sergeant and assigned as chief instructor, a position he accepted on the condition that he could still cook for the base. The outpost thrived. The skitter-lizards, for their part, evolved to be slightly more trap-aware, which Marcus considered a fair trade. The underground water source was properly mapped and maintained. The garden plot produced its first successful harvest of tomatoes, which Marcus declared was proof that Earth vegetables could grow anywhere if you were stubborn enough. And somewhere in Galactic Military Command, in an office far from any desolate moons, a senior officer read the report and made a note in humanity's file. Excellent at following orders, except when dying is involved, in which case they improvise, adapt, and invite everyone to dinner. Recommend for survival situations. Keep away from supply chains, as they may render them obsolete. The galaxy had spent millions of years developing faster-than-light travel, quantum communications, energy weapons, and protocols for every conceivable crisis situation. They'd built an empire on technology, organization, and the careful application of rules. Humans had spent 200,000 years learning to hit things with sticks until those things stopped moving and became dinner. And on a grey moon that was supposed to be a tomb, it turned out that only one of those skill sets actually mattered when the supply ships stopped coming and protocol became irrelevant. The universe, in its infinite complexity, had learned a simple lesson: never underestimate a species that treats survival as a hobby and starvation as a personal insult. And definitely never tell them that food doesn't exist, because they'll take that as a challenge, build a trap, and prove you wrong over a bowl of stew. Dinner, after all, was always served.